SaaS Therapy.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of SaaS Therapy. My name is Todd Kirk, and you are here for the show where we help you save your most important business relationships, your customers. I'm lucky to be joined today by a fantastic guest, Tim Hill, who is the Director of Client Success at Gong, the leading revenue intelligence platform that helps sales team unlock reality and win more deals. Tim has over 10 years of experience in customer success, marketing, and sales, working with some of the most innovative companies in the SaaS world. Tim is passionate about helping customers achieve their goals, leveraging Gong's AI-powered insights to personalize and optimize their sales engagement. Tim, thank you for joining us today, and we're excited to have your insights and stories. I'll add, Tim is also an avid skier. If you're watching the video version of this podcast, you can see some of his his ski poster behind us.
Yeah, Todd, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here, and you and I have had a relationship now for a couple of years. Brainstorm's a happy and long time Gong customer, and so I'm excited to chat a little bit more about my background and how we're approaching customer success. And as we say at Gong, one of our core operating principles is to create raving fans. And I think that's really at its core what customer success is all about.
I love that. I think that's a really great takeaway right at the start. Make your customers raving fans. That's ultimately what we want to do. And I can definitely say, Tim, I'm a raving fan of both you and Gong. So, normally I'm joined by my co-host Casey, and he likes to always start with some silly questions to warm us up. But I'm going to have to do that in his absence, Tim. So I've got a couple of good questions to start out here. So I want to know first, what bothers you more, misquoted movies or mistaken song lyrics?
Ooh, probably misquoted movies, only because I think I'm guilty of mistaken song lyrics myself. And there are some highly quotable movies out there, especially from the late '90s, early 2000s. A lot of good comedies, a lot of good dramas, and I think nailing those is something
That's
that
it's a more of a cardinal sin to misquote.
Yeah.
All right. So when you're online shopping, are you more likely to sort by price or rating?
I suppose it depends, but I would ultimately say rating. I think I'm somebody who puts a huge amount of stock in social proof. That's probably harmed me to some extent with how much money Meta has milked me through Instagram ads over the years. But it is helpful to see reviews and ratings and kind of hear what is probably curated, but at least seems in my head to be social proof.
I love it. Okay, this one's real serious. Would you rather have a pet Pegasus that can't fly or a unicorn that can't use magic?
Pegasus. I feel like you see unicorns way too often. A Pegasus would be
That's
sweet.
true. Pegasus is a majestic creature for
Yeah.
sure. All right. If you could be the first person to discover aliens or the first person to prove that time travel is possible, what would it be?
Time travel, no question. I would say that my fascination of outer space is a bit more limited than the average person. I'm a very happy Earth resident. Time travel would be really sweet, though. I've got time travel and teleporting. I've got family. I live on the West Coast. I've got family on the East Coast. I've talked about things like spending, Christmas morning with my family members, but then being able to get back to the West Coast without having to deal with planes and travel would be ideal.
So good. I love it. See, I feel like I'm learning so much about you, even though I've known you already for a few years. Okay. Last question for you. And that is, if you could have a personal theme song that plays every time you enter into a room, or a catchphrase that you had to say every time before you spoke, which one would it be?
Probably a theme song. I think the catchphrase would get annoying really quickly, but a theme song would be pretty sweet. I play on an adult softball league here, and we've got in town, and we've got walk up songs. So I feel like I've already slowly started to check that box in one capacity at least.
Nice. Next step then is just extending your theme song to every single interaction, period.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, Tim, let's dive in. I think one of the things I was most excited to talk to you about, given the fact that you've worked so long in the customer success world, is when you think about client success, ultimately the most important thing is driving retention, keeping customers, figuring out how to drive growth for the organization by ensuring that you maintain that healthy dose of ARR.
Yeah.
But what would you say? What do people need to know when it comes to moving the needle with retention?
Yeah, I mean, retention is the ultimate lagging indicator for SaaS. A customer opts to, by the time they make a decision to renew, they're likely well into a contracted period. They've made assessments as to whether or not whatever the product is that you're selling or delivering, whether or not it's adding justifiable value. So if we just look at a retention metric, you call it gross dollar retention as an example, there's far less that you can do to influence. Today's February 23rd, to influence March's gross dollar retention by putting into motion today. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try some things when you see customers where there's risk, but there's far less that we can do to influence the outcome than, say, customers who renew in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 24 months. So part of success, customer success, is really about making investments in your customers and how you're supporting them, and ensuring that you're delivering a pretty consistent customer experience with defined milestones, and hopefully a healthy and honest two-way communication between yourself as a CSM or a CS leader and the customer and their key stakeholders. But I think that's where one of the areas where in the SaaS world where sales and CS differ a little bit. Sales, you're constantly focused on building pipeline, and pipeline you might build today may bear fruit in a future quarter or 2 quarters, and certainly as you get up into enterprise motions with long sales cycles, of course that's going to be very true. But in sales, you're also looking at what is in front of me immediately. How do I influence that decision to close within the whatever period of time that you're focused on, a quarter, a half year, a year, etc. Success is planting seeds, farming those seeds, and hopefully bearing the fruits of those seeds in future quarters. One of the other things that ultimately leads to is we need to. One area that we've failed at times in the past is making an investment like that, and then almost forgetting about measuring and assessing the outcomes of those investments in future quarters, or finding it more challenging to tie an outcome to an investment made 6 months, 8 months, 12 months ago. So something we're hyper focused on as we think about the key initiatives. We just started our fiscal year on February 1st. We had our sales kickoff, our entire revenue kickoff with CS and sales the first week of February. So this is week 2, basically, of the year. And there's no shortage of things we're doing and we're investing in and evolving in. Measuring those, the efficacy of those investments is a big piece of the equation.
Tim, I think the thing that sticks out to me there, which I've heard really in the last 6 months, 2 of the most common things that CS leaders look at, I think people are realizing are lagging indicators. One you mentioned is your retention rate. Mm-hmm. And the other one that I hear is the actual usage of the product. Meaning, if you're focused only on are people using it and is that going to help people renew, you're oftentimes too late.
Yeah.
So when like one of the things that sticks out to me and the things that you mentioned there is that you know that there are key activities that you should be doing earlier,
Mhm.
but is it a are we measuring the wrong things in the process to ensure that we're getting to the good rates later? Meaning, what are the leading indicators that we
Yeah.
should be looking at?
It can be a variety of things. I'm going to talk a little bit through the lens of Gong because I've lived it day in day out for nearly 5 years. Um, you're right though. GDR retention, that is a lagging indicator. How do we get there? Adoption is important. If you have a customer that has zero adoption or minimal adoption, of course, the likelihood of retaining that customer, whatever it is that you're selling, is going to be pretty minimal. But healthy adoption, and that is a very nebulous definition depending on what that actually means, users logging in, users consuming features, etc. That doesn't necessarily mean you're good. It obviously helps, but it doesn't mean you're for sure good. So what we've thought about, and where we're putting our focus on at Gong is in two key areas. The first is key personas. We've analyzed our customer data. We have thousands of customers. We have thousands of customer outcomes as it pertains to retention. Customers who are renewing year in year out, customers who are churning, et cetera. And what we've learned from those from analyzing those outcomes is that whether or not you have key personas engaged and using your product matters significantly. We sell to go-to-market organizations. Our key personas typically are a chief revenue officer, chief customer officer, VP or SVP of sales, VP or SVP of revenue operations or sales operations, head of VP, et cetera, of enablement. We even have some of our smaller organizations where folks like CEO and COO are heavily involved in consuming Gong or in the deployment. Now, do we expect to see a CRO logging into Gong every single day and consuming all sorts of bits of data? No, there's very clear defined work streams that a sales rep or a CSM or an SDR would use in Gong, or their frontline manager might use in Gong. There's very clearly different work streams that a revenue operations or sales operations or business analyst or even a CFO or a finance org might get value from Gong. Those often revolve more around broader market and business insights than simply being able to coach a rep on a deal process or coach a rep based on a call that they had. So it kind of depends on a lot of different variables, but the one consistent theme is if we have engagement from key personas and they are utilizing Gong in somewhat of a consistent manner, a weekly cadence or even monthly cadence, we see a 25% improvement in gross retention. So that's the call to our CSM team. How do we ensure engagement with those key personas? The challenge is CROs, COOs, SVPs of sales, they've got a lot of things on their plate. And engaging directly with vendors is typically not something that most are eager to do. So we've got to earn the right to get their to get a portion of their attention in any given time period. And it starts with how do I help them get value from the product without asking for anything in return, right? How can I add value to this person? How can I help them learn something about their business that maybe they didn't know? And that's when you start to get them more engaged. And then, and only then, will those personas consider coming to the CSM saying, what else can you tell me about my business that maybe I don't know, or what else can Gong? Then as you establish that relationship, you put yourself in a great position to unlock new opportunities. if you have a CRO's buy-in on using the product, that the likelihood that their direct reports and cascading organizations are bought in on using it is significantly higher. There's plenty of tools in their stack that they're never ever going to talk to somebody from the company. And I don't, I don't mean any sort of shade towards those products. We use many of them, and they're incredibly valuable. But I think folks need to understand, is this a tool that can actually get the attention of a senior executive, like a calendar scheduling tool? Super useful tool. I use, one all the time. We use, we have a subscription internally. But I can't imagine that our CRO is getting on the phone with a CSM from that company to do a QBR. And I think that's where, where if you are an organization that does have the potential to deliver value to a senior leader like that, you need to do everything you can in your power to deliver.
Tim, that's awesome. I heard a couple of things there that I would love to unpack just a little bit more with you. One is you should start by understanding the persona that's going to drive your renewal. Meaning, if you're going to track a metric that's a leading indicator, is do the right people use the product? And I think that's a really interesting one. And whether you're, in a software that sells to the CEO or the CRO is irrelevant to the whole audience, because if you're if you're a calendaring system, like, who is the primary decision maker, the primary buyer, and are they seeing the value, because they're the ones who hold the purse strings and are going to make the determination in the future.
Yeah, it's exactly it. And I think there's susceptibility in the industry, particularly right now with the current, macro climate within the software industry in particular. If you are a software solution that is either not that hard to rip and replace, like really not that painful, and you aren't serving senior leaders in any meaningful capacity, you're probably going to be very susceptible to losing business purely based off of variables like price. If I can give you a new calendaring solution for 25% less cost, and basically the big change is that reps are going to have to swap out a link in a bunch of templates that they use to schedule meetings with customers, and that's basically it. Probably not the hardest decision a CFO is going to make in their day-to-day. Now, if that solution is something that the CRO relies on and finds immense value from, and maybe this is a bad example, and I don't mean to drag the calendaring software space through the mud.
We don't have to drag them through the mud too much.
But I'm trying to think of a really simplified example. Now, if it's something that the CRO finds immensely valuable and they want to make, they're likely to make an argument, here's why we need to spend 25% more on this product versus an alternative, that's a completely different calculus. And the likelihood that your as the vendor, that your business is retained is significantly higher. So how do you get that person to buy in? We undoubtedly have customers where the CRO thinks Gong is for my reps, and I need to know that my reps are getting value and they're using the product, and that scares the heck out of me, because when I'm thinking about how a renewal discussion within the walls of that company goes, we're not at that table when decisions are being discussed and deliberated and made. Maybe they're going to say, hey, this is great, it's super valuable, we want to renew, and my fear was unfounded. But there have been enough scenarios where a decision was made, there was a surveying of the field, and decisions were made based off of, let's just ask our reps if they care if we swap a tool out. And the reps are sitting there going, sure, whatever. It's you're the decision maker here. And that's how decisions are made. And it stems from a lack of understanding of the potential value that decision maker could get.
Okay, so I've got two follow-up questions to that, Tim, because there's some really good meat there. One is, when you think about your pathway to the right persona, right?
Yeah.
For Gong, it's talking to like a CRO or a COO, somebody who at a high level should be invested. The pathway to them and getting them engaged. First of all, what's the pathway? And then second of all, how do you actually track it and measure it? Meaning, is it
Yeah.
just like, is the CSM putting in your CRM system like, yes, they're engaged and it's just like a
Yeah.
gut feel from the CSM? Or do you have standards for how you determine if that CRO is actually engaged?
Yeah. So both great questions. This is where a collaborative effort between sales and success comes into play. You ink a new customer. An AE gets a customer to sign a new business contract. Congratulations, you've just bought Gong. We're going to begin your implementation ASAP. What we mandate with our sales team is that they're delivering that executive sponsor into an initial strategic alignment call that the CSM is driving. That and essentially handing off that relationship up front. So at bare minimum, we've got a name and a face on both sides of this is the person whose ultimate responsibility is ensuring your success and that your business is retained. And the only way we retain your business is if we deliver requisite value against the spend that you're making and actually impact your business and outcomes that you're hoping to drive. Our CSMs work in that first session essentially to begin the journey of earning credibility. And that starts with working to deeply understand the customer's business. What are the big bets? What are the key initiatives that customer has in their plan for the year? Sometimes customers don't think that Gong can influence some of those big initiatives, and it turns out that we can. So there's also a degree of education. But to the extent that we understand the business, that then allows us to be far more prescriptive with both that key stakeholder and their team for how Gong should be deployed. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of different use cases and workflows within the product. Not all of them are applicable to every customer. They should be tied to what that business truly cares about. So that's step one. And then on an ongoing and recurring basis, we talk a lot about earning coins, so to speak. And earning coins is what I mean by that is how can we deliver value without asking for anything in return to a key stakeholder so that they are kept apprised of the status of this investment they've made in a software and that they themselves are potentially learning new insights about their business that they had maybe previously been unaware of. What that looks like is consistent and repeated communication to key stakeholders about their business and about how Gong is going. It starts with you're in the midst of your implementation. This is the status. Be honest. Things are going well. Great. Things are going okay, but I see A and B signals that give me some concern. I wanted to make you aware. To we are in a complete failure to launch situation, and we need to have a conversation to ensure that we're back on track. You've made this big investment, and I'm very concerned about the return that you're going to get. So that's like during implementation, and on an ongoing basis. What can you share asynchronously? There's no let's get on a call to discuss. There's no we need to have a QBR. There's none of that. It's simply here's some interesting insights about your business, and I wanted you to be aware of how things were going. And is there a drip of information that I can provide that gives you a higher degree of confidence that this was a good investment? That to me is what we talk about. You're earning a coin every time. And eventually you've earned enough coins that maybe that key stakeholder is going to say, hey, this information is really interesting, but I'd like to understand it a little bit more. Can we talk? They're the one asking for time. They're the one giving you their mind share. And that's how we build a deeper relationship and ideally uncover opportunities for that CRO to actually begin using Gong or VP of RevOps to begin using Gong and actually getting tangible value themselves. I'll share another example that is that we've been a rhythm we have internally at Gong. Myself and my fellow segment heads in customer success, as well as other folks in other lines of business, we send a weekly update to an ELT distribution list and a few other folks internally. Covers everything from run the business metrics, what did we see week over week, how are things trending, what are some anecdotes, what are some key renewals we want to put a big focus on, how are things, how are our cross-functional departments doing to service customers, implementation, our customer education team, our support team, et cetera, all sorts of run the business metrics, and then other commentary on new initiatives or engagements that we're testing with customers. Hey, we're trying out this new thing with a certain number of CSMs on the team, et cetera. Kind of sharing that commentary. We send it every week, and I'd say someone from ELT responds to that maybe once a month. Otherwise, it's this note that goes into the ether. And yes, I can see that there's opens and reads on the email, but to the degree at which it's deeply consumed, sometimes you question, like, is this actually being consumed? So the week between Christmas and New Year's, I get a message. It's Monday. I send it out typically the end of the day Monday. It's Monday morning. I get a message from our CRO saying, I guess maybe it was Tuesday. I think Christmas was a Monday. But nevertheless, I get a message from our CRO saying, hey, are you going to send an update out this week? It's the thing I look forward to reading the most on a weekly basis. And it reinforced with me that you got to keep earning coins over time. And even if I don't get a response, I know that this is being consumed and read, and I'm informing folks about the status of a key part of the business, and I'm providing them insights that maybe they otherwise wouldn't have known or been aware of, or they would have only found out way, way down the road when maybe it was too late to weigh in and influence. And we need to have that same mindset with our customers. And that's what I'm instilling with my team. And it's a work in progress. I'm not going to sit here and say, hey, we do this exceptionally well with 100% of customers. No, of course, there's pockets of really, really great work. And there's also pockets where there's huge opportunity to do more.
Tim, that's amazing. There's so much good there. I think one of my favorite parts about doing this podcast is it always sparks really fun ideas for me. I hope our listeners also walk away with some really cool ideas of things they can do. Let me quickly try to summarize some of the things there that I thought were really awesome. One is when it comes to understanding your persona, the first step is identify them and get an introduction. Yep. Second is learn what they care about. Make sure that you understand what their priorities are, and then consistently drip out relevant messages, relevant context, relevant insights that you know that they're going to care about until they actually initiate the bigger conversation. And that's maybe the way that you define if you're winning, if you're getting their attention and they're initiating the conversation. That is a really good signal that you've actually got them engaged. Is that a fair summary of what you mentioned there?
It is. And I would add one piece to that too. Just by simply adding value and dripping insights to key stakeholders, it won't 100% of the time yield some sort of inbound request to learn more or to talk. Probably won't more times than not. What it does is it's slowly building your credibility so that if you get to a place where you say, oh, shoot, we've got some risk, we've got a problem here, the likelihood that you can break down that wall with a key stakeholder and say, look, this is a moment where I am asking for something, the likelihood of success goes up. And I'm all about increasing odds, increasing probability. None of what I said is going to work 100% of the time. But if you're 25, 75 at best, that if you cold outreach to a CRO because the account's at risk and we're coming down to the wire with a renewal and you're worried about the customer churning and you've done nothing and it's 25, 75, what could you have done over the recent 6 months to make that 50-50? or 60-40 or 75-25. It's never going to be 100-0. And that's what I want my team to think about. It's playing the odds, and putting ourselves in the best possible position.
It's so good. I love that. And one of the things that I loved in your story was the fact that you found internal validation with your own executive team and the way that you were communicating. I think that's one of the things that many probably CS leaders forget is the executive team needs to have that kind of visibility so they're better at making decision making and empowering you. So much of the actions that we should be taking is trying to, I love that coin analogy. If you want to make sure that your bank account is in the green so you don't overdraw, right? And I think too often we're operating on from a therapy perspective, I always like to use analogies from my personal life, right? If you're living paycheck to paycheck with your customers constantly, then when some unexpected expense comes up, or there's a bad interaction, or the product doesn't work well, then you overdraft, and that can actually lead you into danger. And if you do that too often, you're going to end up declaring bankruptcy, or the customer is going to leave, right? So I think that idea of having enough of a savings account accrued so that when something bad does happen, you don't overdraw, that's a really, really good and sound principle to live by.
Yeah, the customer success rainy day fund. I think you're spot on there. And I think too, with especially folks earlier in their CS career, there's probably this naivety that exists amongst some who assume that simply because a decision maker has chosen to invest in a vendor and purchase a software, that is the credibility needed, that they will want to talk, they will want to engage, they will want to use the product. And that's generally not true. Of course, you're going to get like the super hands-on person, typically at a smaller company where maybe there's less delegation even possible. And that degree of naivety actually leads to even worse outcomes, because you run the risk of, I don't know, maybe this is a simplification, but almost like annoying your key stakeholders. Like, who are you? You've done nothing to earn credibility. You don't work for me. I owe you nothing. I'm paying you, right? And that kind of, and I'm being a little bit negative there, but I think to highlight the point, I think we need folks to understand that this job is constantly about earning credibility, and sometimes you earn credibility, and sometimes that how that credibility benefits you can take a number of different turns. And I think that's the other side of this for us, is not just, great, you've got a relationship with the CRO, you've done your job, they're using the product, that's value. Are we multi-threaded with stakeholders across the board? Because newsflash, the evergreen risk for any software is executive turnover. CROs change jobs. They unfortunately get let go if they're not hitting targets. This is a reality that exists always, has nothing to do with the macroeconomic climate where businesses are reducing their team sizes, they're making difficult decisions. Sure, that's a recent pain that we're all kind of grappling with, but executive turnover is true agnostic of industry, of what you sell, of who you sell to. So have we built relationships with multiple key stakeholders? Do we have champions underneath them? If a new CRO comes in and says, Gong, what about it? I've heard of it. Maybe I've even used it before. It's an expense. Is it worth it? Is anybody going to say anything? Is anyone going to fight? That's the question I ask my team. And if they can't answer that with a extremely confident yes, the good news is that's a very clear CTA that there's more work to be done. And that helps direct us. You asked about how do we measure the engagement of key stakeholders. One thing that we had done in the past, and it's not scalable and it will never work, is some sort of manual identification of who your key stakeholders are, largely because It's dependent on a rep's assessment of the account. Are they truly understanding who the decision makers are, or are they simply assuming those who've presented themselves as day-to-day contacts are decision makers, influencers, champions, etc. And with things like turnover at the leadership level, it just becomes a bear to maintain. So we're using Gong. We can understand titles. Our customers are almost all integrating Gong with their CRM, and your CRM users have titles. So we use that to identify who we believe to be our key stakeholder. And of course, it's not perfect, but it's far, far better to do that. That allows us to then assess, we have basically a measure of is a key stakeholder doing even basic things in Gong. We're not focused on super advanced insights and workflows necessarily, even just basic adoption, daily, weekly, monthly, and we would call seldom or never. And it's the customers that are falling in where they have 0 or 1 key persona using Gong seldom or less. Those are the ones we've bucketed into a quote unquote key persona risk bucket. And there's a direct call to action. We built playbooks around how do we get to power? How do we get to key personas? What are the ways in which we can engage with them and start to earn coins? That's a huge focus that we're putting on the team today. And our belief is that if we can narrow and say, really just focus on key personas, of course, there's other interaction and engagement they're having with accounts. But if you narrow the focus to only a few things and execute on those really effectively and consistently, you're going to get the right outcomes nearly every time. I think when businesses and when success orgs try to do too many things, engage with your key sponsors, run a quarterly business review with every customer, train all these users, focus on building champions, build some groundswell, do all these different things, the CSMs become overwhelmed and they end up doing maybe halfway in each of those categories and doing each of them at a mediocre at best level. And I think that's what we've been guilty of that too, by the way. There's no doubt about that. So we've decided, hey, look, we've done like a lot of really deep analysis in what attributes and patterns and engagements look like for customers where we get the right outcomes. And we've narrowed to a more simplified rally cry for our team. And it's starting to, I think folks are really rallied around it, which is good. And we're already starting to see early returns. But certainly a lot more work to be done.
Tim, I think I love it. I think one of the things that's really unique about you and the way that Gong is structured is that, you've built your business around the credibility that comes from thinking about the sales and the retention process, and you've built your product and your systems internally around that thought leadership, which is really cool. Yeah. One of the things that sticks out to me in this process is that at least one of the friction points that I see pretty commonly with various organizations that I talk to is that there's a disconnect between sales and between CS and between customer education and support and implementation. And oftentimes, if you're big enough, those are different teams that are working differently. Have you seen that with Gong? And if so, how have you tried to remediate kind of a lack of alignment within the organization to make sure that all of these things you're talking about actually happen?
Yeah. Incentives have to be aligned. I mean, that's the simplest form. We've moved into a new model about midway through last year. We moved our customer success division under the CRO. That's certainly following a lot of industry trends, with CS being viewed as a revenue responsible and revenue generating function. And I think folks who are in the CS profession need to get on board with that reality, because that is clearly the direction that things are heading in today. but it's brought with it a ton of natural alignment. And we've now aligned incentives between sales and success appropriately in an effort to really drive a harmony between those roles and how we support our customers. So I'll give you an example of how that looks, at least at Gong. We CSMs are compensated with at least there's a base and a variable component. The variable component of their compensation is tied to heavily weighted towards gross dollar retention. And then they're also compensated on expansion within their book. Conversely, on the sales side, they're heavily weighted on net new revenue. So that's largely new business, but also expansion within the customer base. And it's about an 80-20 split, 80% new revenue, 20% gross retention of accounts that they that are our current customers that sit in their book. And on the CS side, it's 80% gross retention, 20% expansion. So our incentives are aligned. There is like really great harmony there. Each side has an overweight on what they need to be focused on, but CSMs are then identifying opportunities and collaborating with the account executive on the account, saying, "Hey, we have Gong has multiple products that we sell. We've got an opportunity to." The customer wants to explore Gong's forecasting solution or sales engagement platform. So they're then bringing in the AE, who is we use the term drives, not owns. The AE is the driver of that selling motion and commercial motion and contracting, et cetera. Whereas the CSM is really the driver of the renewal motion and the driver of the adoption and value realization motion. But there's absolutely scenarios where the AE is coming in to help, the AE is supporting, and the CSM vice versa. And if this clicks, and we've just launched this in this new fiscal year, but we're all really excited about it. CSMs are incredibly excited about this alignment because it really feels like a true partnership. We're already seeing, even just a few weeks in, the fruits of those new roles and responsibilities bearing in the most positive ways.
I think I don't know how novel it is or how obvious it is that of course we should do this, but so many organizations don't. They create all these unnatural silos with a complex account team that all have kind of misaligned objectives and goals that they're trying to achieve. And simply put, you're saying no, we can't afford to put 10 different people on every single account, 5 different people on every single account, but we can make sure that the pre-sales and the post-sales, that they feel like they're a team that are both going to be compensated if they work together appropriately.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'll give you 2 scenarios where how this plays out in our world. The first one is the one I shared a second ago, which is the customer wants to explore expanding. Maybe it's a new business unit onto Gong or a new team, or they want to look at another product that we offer. So the CSM is the one who is far more engaged on a day-to-day with the customer. They're the one likely to uncover that opportunity. And CSMs are incented because part of their compensation ties to the expansion of their accounts, even if they're not the one selling the dollars and cents, motion in the contract. So they identify, hey, AE, we've got this opportunity here. I'm going to bring you in. We're going to run this cycle. You're going to drive. I'm going to sit in the co-pilot seat. So that's scenario A. Pretty straightforward one. Scenario B is customer has maybe they've purchased 100 licenses for Gong for their sales and their SDR team. And unfortunately, that customer has gone through a slight reduction in force, and they're only using 80 of their 100 licenses. They might be getting a ton of value and absolutely planning to renew, but there's still some dollar churn there, right? If they're only going to renew 80 of the 100 licenses, our contract value goes down. The CSM is compensated based on gross retention. So there is some risk there to their compensation model. And they are now probing the customer to identify, are there other teams that don't currently use Gong that could actually use these additional licenses? And that's where the AE can come in. Hey, what if the customer success team was on Gong? Customer success can get, I think, even more value from Gong than sales teams can, which is a separate topic for a separate podcast episode. But now we're bringing an AE in to help almost resell the customer or sell the existing seats to another line of business. And what that does, the AE isn't compensated, from a net new revenue standpoint, because there might not be much to gain there. But their incentive, they have in their comp plan gross retention. So this is protecting the base, and 100% gross retention of an account is well over what the aggregate target is going to be. So they actually stand to gain when that customer renews flat year over year. And that is where like the harmony comes in of how do we help one another with both expansion but also risk management.
Tim, so much good stuff here. We as we're wrapping up here, I hope everybody goes back, and I've said this in so many of the interviews we've done of like, man, I feel like I got to go listen to this 10 times. There's so much meat here. So thank you for all of your insights, Tim. We usually like to end these podcasts with one individual question that we ask everybody, which is, this is SaaS Therapy. And the only way that you're really going to, improve if you're going through therapy is if you take action outside of your therapy session. So what homework would you suggest our audience take on after listening to this conversation today?
I think it's got to be around making sure that you truly and deeply understand your personas and what they care about. And you might, depending on who you sell to and who you serve, those personas could care about pretty dramatically different things, even within one individual account. And making sure you're getting alignment. I think being extremely honest about, do you understand those personas and are you providing them incremental value? And having a healthy dose of paranoia about it is I think the homework that I would do.
Oh, I love it so much. Well, hey everyone, thank you for tuning in to today's episode of SaaS Therapy. Thank you, Tim, for joining me today. And to our listeners, remember, change is a process, so embrace data, listen to feedback from your customers, and I hope you take action this week with the homework that we received from Tim. So thanks everyone, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, Todd.